Welcome to Werezilla's Retrospective. I'm your host, Werezilla. Godzilla and Ultraman are most likely very well-known names thanks to how influential they are in the creation of what is known as tokusatsu. But that is in regard to giant monsters and heroes respectively. But what about ones that stay their normal size? Well, their greatest influence came in 1971. It was during this time that Toho Studios was interested in adapting the manga known as Skull Man into a live-action show. For those of you unfamiliar, Skull Man was the Punisher before Marvel actually made the Punisher. But the manga wasn't as child-friendly as Toei was hoping for. So they commissioned its creator, Shotaro Ishinomori, a man with epic hair by the way, to develop a new series instead. The end result is a franchise that has lasted for over 50 years. Kamen Rider. Rider! The show opens with a memorable theme song. It really gets you pumped for the upcoming show. For the first 13 episodes, it's sung by the show's lead actor, Hiroshi Fujioka. Rider! Jump! Rider! Kick! Kamen Rider! Kamen Rider! Rider! Starting in episode 14, vocalist Masato Shimon takes over the role. Rider! Jump! Rider! Kick! Kamen Rider! Kamen Rider! Rider! Shimon is a voice you've likely heard in other tokusatsu shows from the 70s, such as Android Kikaider, another series developed by Shotaro Ishinomori, and Zone Fighter, better known as the Ultraman knockoff that was made by Toho, meaning they could legally include Godzilla. Speaking of which, Shimon also sang this song. Zit Jaga, Yatta Jaga. You'll never look at either song the same way again. I think it's also worth bringing up the song Rider Action. It starts off as an insert theme that's used for action scenes before taking over as the theme song for the last 9 episodes of the show. And unfortunately, I think it's an inferior song. Doesn't have the same blood-pumping feel as the first. Rider, kiku, teki o taoshita rider, choppu, oh, rider, kamen rider. Now, as you already spotted, the visuals of the opening theme is unfortunately just our rider hero riding his motorcycle through the countryside. Not the most exciting thing you'll see, especially with how awesome the music is. Still, it harkens back to a time before the Japanese government put huge restrictions on films and TV shows' ability to shoot motorcycle stunts using custom bikes in the first place. That's why later Kamen Rider shows have depicted their heroes on their rider machines much less frequently. And when you do see bikes these days, they are mostly CGI. Now as we move on to talking about the first episode, its title is one that makes me tilt my head. The Eerie SpiderMan. I mean, I don't think it's meant to be a reference to Bully Maguire. Nope. The Spider-Man of this universe is a cyborg monster who abducts our show's main character, college student Takeshi Hongo. Also, Hongo can be rebuilt into a cyborg against his will at the behest of a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world. Hongo Takeshi, yokoso waga shokka ni kite kureta. Shokka. Wait, hold a moment. Spider-Man is working for Shocker. Shocker! You can't escape me! I'll chase you to the ends of the earth! So many potential Spider-Man jokes, they just don't end. Especially after Kamen Rider Revice gave us this. Before Shocker scientists can finish the surgery that would make Hongo their loyal super soldier, he's rescued by his old college teacher, Professor Midorikawa. You might be wondering how his college teacher of all people ends up helping Hongo in his escape. It's because he's the first of many scientists we will see in this series that were captured by and forced to work for Shocker. And apparently when they asked him for a candidate for their latest grasshopper-themed cyborg, he recommended Hongo. In a modern series, I suspect this would lead to a troubled relationship between the two throughout. But episodic Showa series don't really have time for that kind of ongoing character drama, so instead, Midorikawa is killed shortly afterwards. His daughter Ruriko thinks Hongo is the one responsible, and doesn't believe him when he protests his innocence because... well, I mean, would you believe someone if you were told a loved one was killed by Spider-Man? You'd probably assume it's typical Daily Bugle slander.
It is not. I resent that. Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
Okay. That's enough Spider-Man jokes. For now. After all, he's not a villain general, he's the first monster of the week. Meaning he is of course defeated in Hongo's first fight as a Kamen Rider. Even this early on, Hongo finishes off the monster like this. The disintegration is a little different than what you might expect though. After decades of watching monsters explode when they're defeated, it's easy to forget that for the first 8 episodes, Kamen Rider didn't have the budget for explosions. So they had to show the monsters being destroyed in other ways. The way this monster is taken out is one of the most visually creative. Light a chop! The effects are super dated, but they are enjoyable in a cheesy way. Hongo's rider costume is basic and crude by modern standards thanks to the exposed neck and hair, but the design is iconic in its own way. It has the basic silhouette of Skull Man while including a grasshopper motif to give the suit its own unique look. The quality of the monster costumes are cheap, with visible zippers on the back, while the suit actors' eyes are not only visible through the eye holes, but said eye holes are often a bit too big, showing off more of the actor's skin than it's supposed to. That is when the mask is on straight, which is not always the case. There's no getting around the fact the monsters literally look like people wearing costumes, although I suspect that might be true in-universe. The process by which Shocker gave Hongo his powers is the same in which they create their monsters. Turn an ordinary person into a cyborg with an animal or occasionally a plant motif, and unlike Hongo, they don't get rescued, so these people get their personality rewritten through brain surgery into becoming loyal Shockers. This leads me to believe the suit is part of their cybernetics, and as such, the suit actor's visible skin is meant to be what's left of the original person's organic body underneath. And yeah, you heard me right. The followers of Shocker are called Shockers. Because redundancy is redundant. Also, in case you didn't catch it, that technically means Hongo is a Shocker monster. Meaning if history had gone down a very different route, he'd be a monster of a week. Which is interesting because in 2018, we'd be introduced to the Another Riders, people who were given the powers of Kamen Riders in order to turn them into monsters of the week. There is the rare exception where Shocker finds a willing participant for the reconstructive surgery, the standout example being Scorpion Man, the third monster of the week and Hongo's old friend. A friendship that was a lot more one-sided than Hongo originally thought, as this guy actually hated Hongo for always beating him in bike races, and so joined Shocker of his own volition as a means of getting revenge. And as a consequence, Shocker let him keep his original mind. If you're used to Heisei and Reiwa era shows, you might expect people to change back to normal after being defeated, but that is not the case in the Showa era. With exactly 4 exceptions in the whole show, and it's not really clear why they're the exceptions to the rule, Shocker monsters remain Shockers, and basically need to be put down. Old monsters are occasionally brought back to serve as reinforcements for their latest monster, and they're frequently voiced by different actors than in their original episode, implying they aren't so much brought back to life, but instead Shocker found a fresh victim and turned them into a second version of the old monster. This is exactly what happens at the beginning of episode 16, where a monster spits out a gas so toxic, it kills the monster, forcing Shocker to have to make a new one using someone with more endurance. There's another thing we should touch on, the mood Kamen Rider establishes, especially in the early 13 episodes. Even though this is very much a children's action show, typical episodes open more like a horror movie, with the Shocker Monster of the Week performing an opening kill on an innocent bystander. Security guards and traffic cops are the cannon fodder of this show, I swear. The episode titles help add to this greatly. Titles like Mutalaka's Monster Classroom, Monster Wolfman's Murder Party, and especially this early one, Creepy Wasp Woman. Maybe because Roger Corman actually made a movie called Wasp Woman. Shocker is very much meant to be an unsettling and ominous force. Their agents hidden everywhere. Literally any guest star could and often turn out to be loyal to, or at least are being forced to work for Shocker. They're a conspiracy theorist's worst nightmare. Something especially prominent in the early part of the show is whenever Hongo confronts their foot soldiers, the Shocker combat men. The music becomes eerie and the camera angles shift positions, to the point that even Hongo comes across as if he's being affected by the visuals. Good thing for him, he's not completely alone in this fight. I mentioned Ruriko, who, like I said, believes Hongo is the one who killed her father. But after the second Monster of the Week admits Shocker is the one actually responsible, she becomes one of Hongo's allies in investigating their plots, alongside her friend Hiromi, a name that now sounds kinda familiar. However, to my surprise, in episode 6, Hongo hesitates to transform in front of Ruriko. It was here that I realized she doesn't actually know Hongo is a Kamen Rider, which is not the impression I got in the second episode when he was fighting Batman. No, really, the second Monster of the Week was named Batman. He is not Vengeance nor the Knight, however. He's a stain on the pavement instead. Remember, part of the reason this show was made instead of a Skullman series was because that would have been too graphic for children. Since I brought up both monsters, I guess I might as well mention Spider-Man and Batman are iconic figures for the franchise. Maybe it's the simple novelty of having monsters named after famous superheroes, but either way, many Rider series to come would often start off with a Spider monster and a Bat monster as one of the earliest fought. The recent anniversary series, Kamen Rider Revised, decided to take it in a slightly different direction. Instead of being early monsters, they are the motifs for some of the show's riders. I've shown you demons based on Spider-Man, while Kamen Riders Live and Janu's motifs are an homage to Batman and another early Shocker monster, Cobra Man, notable for being the first monster to be revived and upgraded for a rematch with Hongo, though what I first took note of is how he's the first monster to explode! It's also the first time we see a monster fall flat on their face, as Cobra Man successfully breaks into a vault, killing the guards, but is then chased away by their dog, managing to lose his prosthetic fangs along the way. No wonder Lovecough was such a comedic character on Revice. The original Cobra Man was a total goof as well. Of course, tonally they are very different characters. Putting them together that can lead to some interesting results. And to complete our brief detour about the show's most famous early monsters that became the basis for Revice's riders, we've sort of already mentioned them in passing. To be blunt, the Roger Corman movie is not the only reason I mentioned the monster Wasp Woman. Aguilera is the other reason. These four monsters have come a long way is all I'm saying. That was a long tangent. Back to the topic of Hongo's allies. Now, someone he is willing to share his secret with is his racing coach and mentor, Tobei Tachibana. No, not that one. He's played by Akaji Kobayashi, a veteran of the genre as he was previously on the original Ultraman, and in the 90s he would appear in 2 of the Heisei-era Godzilla movies. Tachibana is perhaps his most famous role, one he will go on to reprise in the next 4 shows, serving as mentor to all of Hongo's successors up until Kamen Rider Stronger. I know what you're thinking, and the answer is yes. Much like how the first 6 seasons of Power Rangers are known as its Zordon era, we can call the first 5 seasons of Kamen Rider its Tachibana era for similar reasons. And I can see why, as Tachibana is consistently there to support Hongo and help him train for battle, always leading to some new technique that can be used to defeat the monster. Now is perhaps a good time to mention how Hongo's actor Hiroshi Fujioka did more than just perform the song for the first 13 episodes. He also performed his own stunts both in and out of suit. This makes him a real-life badass, but his decision to do his own stunts changed the direction of Kamen Rider production forever in the Cobra Man episodes. While filming episode 10, Fujioka fell off his motorcycle and shattered his leg, requiring lots of surgery and months of recovery time. This is why stunt doubles exist, my dearest viewers. With its lead actor no longer available, episodes 11 through 13 would only depict Hongo as either fully transformed with a different actor providing his voice, or reuse footage from earlier episodes. Again, this might seem familiar to fans of early Power Rangers who remember when that show needed to use similar techniques to make it look like some of its lead characters were still around after their actors quit.
Tachibana and Ruriko are the real focus of these episodes, as Hongo is only around to fight the monster, investigating their plot off-screen, while they do their own investigation on what Shocker's evil plan of the week is, along with a new character, FBI agent Kazuya. He's attacked by Shocker during his wedding, which is how he runs into Tachibana, and the good news is he's able to hold his own against the Shocker combat men. But in a pattern we will be seeing for the rest of the show, he is hopelessly outmatched when it comes to Shocker's monsters. Also, we never see his wife again after Taki's debut, which is indicative of a whole other issue later episodes will have. A modern audience might look at these episodes and assume the show is setting up Taki to become the show's new lead character, but that is not the route the show goes. Instead, episode 14, The Devil Sabagoron Attacks, introduces Hayato Ichimonji. He's a photographer who was captured by Shocker and turned into a second Kamen Rider, but was rescued by Hongo before he could be brainwashed, at which point the two agreed Hayato would continue to fight against Shocker in Japan, while Hongo would travel to Europe to battle Shocker's international forces. And Ruriko apparently decided to go with Hongo. Yeah, when Fujioka left the show, Ruriko's actress Chiako Maki also left, for some reason. I know this sounds like an exciting series of events, but almost all of it is exposition. Even without Fujioka available, I feel a suit actor wearing the first rider suit would have been fine for filming a proper scene depicting Hayato's capture and rescue, but that's what we're told is what happened. Not shown. Which makes no sense, as episodes 14 and 15 are a two-parter. Surely they had time to tell Hayato's origin. Instead, the episode's main focus is about a cactus monster traveling from Mexico to Japan, boasting about how he's got a spotless record, and it's far less interesting. He makes a significant change to the status quo by introducing the more famous luchador variant of the Shocker combat men, replacing the beret guys from before, but this should be window dressing for the transition between our two protagonists, not what we focus on. Despite a shaky introduction, our new lead is a welcome change. Given Shocker literally violated the bodily autonomy of our lead characters, there's a word for that, they react to being turned into cyborgs in different ways. Hongo kept to himself, often brooding about how he no longer feels like a human anymore, sharing a common Superman trope of needing to keep his strength under control for fear of accidentally hurting people. It's dumb that he keeps his identity a secret from Ruriko, given she's helping him fight Shocker, but I appreciate that his reason for it isn't for her protection, as is typical for most superheroes. Rather, he's afraid of being rejected by others for no longer being human. Fair enough for the first 13 episodes in which he's the protagonist, I suppose, especially when you look at the design of his first suit. Switch out his Typhoon driver. Sorry, the term driver won't be used for a rider's transformation belt until 2003, I mean just the Typhoon, for a Shocker belt, and aesthetically he looks exactly like what you would expect if Shocker made a Grasshopper Man, which was probably their original intention for Hongo in the first place. By comparison, Hayato is still able to socialize with people despite his experience. Notably, he spends more time fighting bad guys with Taki rather than Tachibana, which makes a degree of sense. Taki's on a mission, and teaming up with the local superhero is a smart move. Tachibana still gives Hayato guidance, episode 31 being a standout example, but if there's anyone Tachibana views as a surrogate son, it's more so Hongo than Hayato. I like that contrast, and it's even more noticeable in how they fight. When the show started, Hongo did a bunch of high jumps and acrobatic flips. It's often described as a character trait of his, being a very skilled fighter with knowledge of a lot of fighting techniques. I assumed this was because Shocker based his powers off a grasshopper originally. This is somewhat countered in the early episodes, given all of the monsters and even the combat men can do the same stunts. A lot of this seems to have been to compensate for some of the earlier episodes' less than stellar fight choreography, because the monsters do this less often as time goes on, mostly because the fight choreography improves over time. What was always a unique trait would be how Hongo would take the time to laugh at the bad guys whenever he's outwitted them. By comparison, Hayato is more of a brawler. He's very relaxed around other people, but in battle he's laser focused on taking the bad guys down. No making fun of them for being tricked, he's here to give them the punch in the head they deserve. Speaking of differences, Hayato is the one who introduced the very idea of a transformation sequence to the series. Before, Hongo would transform by getting on his bike and going fast enough to make the turbines on his Typhoon spin, or that one time the concussive force of an explosion triggered his transformation. In fact, this happens in a Hayato episode as well, an early warning sign that Shocker doesn't learn from their mistakes. Usually, though, Hayato transforms by dabbing before dabbing was cool, with a now traditional cry of Henshin!
Unfortunately, there's one other change to the status quo that I'm not super happy about. Some people might call me woke for even talking about this, but honestly the point of a review is to give feedback. If I don't do that, then I'm not doing this right.
A major change in location and the cast happens in Hayato's debut. We drop the fruit parlor from the first 13 episodes, and it's here Tachibana establishes his own racing club. Hiromi more or less takes Ruriko's place, helping Tachibana investigate Shocker's whereabouts. Now there's an amusing homage to the original series that Revice made by accident. The character named Hiromi ends up with a much larger role than originally planned. Sadly, episode 34 is the last time we see her. Prior to this, in Hayato's introduction, Hiromi introduces to the series Yuri, her younger brother Goro, and what are their names? Oh, right, Mari and Michi. These new characters are perhaps the most unnecessary addition to the show. You'd think they'd at least be seen doing plenty of motorcycle stunts and races, given they're members of the Tachibana Racing Club, but that doesn't happen. Instead, most of the time they're just goofing around so old man Tachibana can grumble about the kids these days, which is hilarious given this aired in 1971. Eventually it's settled into a different role, moral support for the guest stars being targeted by Shocker. Sometimes it's a young woman their age who ends up blending in with the trio sadly, but more prominently is small children. Often children of a scientist that Shocker wants to make use of, though just as frequently it's a kid who happened to witness the episode's opening kill. This is where Goro comes into play as the audience surrogate for the kids watching this show back in the 70s, befriending the children attacked by Shocker and being the Kamen Riders' biggest fan. He's one of many, as child guest stars follow in Goro's example and are very quick to start referring to Hayato as Oni-chan, a Japanese term one uses to affectionately refer to someone as an older sibling. This happens with pretty much every one of them, frequently beginning early in their first conversation with him. Does the little twerp grow on you after a while? You get used to him. My tolerance for him varied from episode to episode. He almost gets hit by a car one episode, and the unrepentant driver ends up being turned into the episode's monster, so that's something. Circling back to the ladies, of the three, Yuri is the only one who remains for the rest of the show. Michi is gone after only 9 episodes, and Mari's last episode is the 38th. But at least she got some moments to shine, like the time she pulled off the gas mask of a Shocker scientist, resulting in their accidental death at the hands of their own monster. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. They are both replaced by 2 new ladies, Emi and Mika in episode 40, assistants Hongo picked up in Europe who do even less than the last pair. In fact, one of them leaves after episode 52 and is replaced in the following episode with a random girl the others picked up at the zoo in the middle of a Shocker attack. Seriously, I thought she was a guest star and was surprised to see her continue to appear on the show until she and the remaining Europe assistants are unceremoniously dropped after episode 69. Stop laughing. Episode 70 then has Yuri bring in 2 new friends of hers to replace them, with the men casually saying, "Yeah, sure, you can join us, no questions asked." They are so superfluous they're added to the cast before we even learn their names. Which are Choco and Yoko, by the way. Because that's not the important part. The show just needs 3 pretty faces so it's not a total sausage fest. As for how Taki fits into the series, he largely serves as Hayato's ally, providing leads as to what Shocker might be up to, leading people to safety while Hayato fights the monsters, as well as being able to fight alongside Hayato, at least against the grunts. Because pretty much every time he's confronted by a monster, Taki is overpowered and used as bait. Admittedly, it's an improvement over the other FBI agents we see over the course of this show. Without the same plot armor as Taki, they're almost always killed by a monster. And on top of all of this, the FBI doesn't have the authority to operate in countries outside the United States without the expressed authority of the local government, so Taki's very presence in the show is an international incident waiting to happen. All of this initially led me to half-jokingly say to myself when watching that he's the worst FBI agent ever. But upon reflection, Taki's plot armor makes him the most competent in the whole series, at least compared to every other example the show gives us. Hey, does anyone else hear footsteps? Here we go, one of the more entertaining parts of the show, Shocker's first villain general. Prior to episode 26, the monsters would be following the orders of Shocker's great leader, never seen, only heard from a speaker mounted on the wall. And because monsters are all loyal soldiers in terms of personality, it can get kinda samey. Colonel Zol's introduction adds a little more to the format. Unlike the great leader and his Shockers, who are evil because that's the role they fill on the show, Colonel Zol is evil because he enjoys hurting people. He's responsible for one of the funniest and illogical episodes of the series, the revived mummy monster Egyptus. Here he has an ancient mummy transformed into a cyborg in the hopes of learning the location of a treasure the ancient Egyptians sent to Japan 4,000 years previously. as in during the 4th millennium BC. How was a treasure sent from ancient Egypt to ancient Japan? Your guess is as good as mine. Way back in the initial batch of Hongo episodes, Shocker was chasing after a different treasure, one the Nazis hid in Japan during World War II. Certainly sounds more plausible, and I wonder if the Colonel is compensating for not being present for that plot by going for something even more outlandish. Not to mention they establish Egyptus can understand the modern Japanese spoken by the Shockers around him, but he can't speak it himself, despite being a cyborg of their own creation.
You see what I mean when I say so much of this show is like watching a cheesy B-movie? Somebody should show this to James Rolfe. He'd probably enjoy it.
Also, according to Kamen Rider, this is what ancient Egyptian sounded like. One last thing worth talking about before we move on is the addition to being in charge of Shocker's Japanese branch, Colonel Zoll is also one of their monsters. Well, okay, he was already a monster in the sense he tries to indoctrinate a bunch of children so they will grow up into becoming Shocker followers, but he's also literally a monster. Unveiled in episode 39, Zoll's last evil plan involves spreading lycanthropy across Japan as Shocker's Wolfman. Yeah, that's pretty much the beginning and end as far as similarities between these two characters are concerned, seeing as Tamaki ended up being the first of Revice's villains to be redeemed. Colonel Zoll, meanwhile, is a Nazi cyborg werewolf. And his defeat comes with a little bonus. It happens on December 25th, making Hayato the first Kamen Rider to save Christmas, a tradition that has continued for 5 decades.